Hi there. Tonight we delve into a chilling chapter of history, one where the whispers of infidelity could unravel a woman's entire existence. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a cold, damp cobblestone street in a medieval town. The air hangs heavy with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. You can almost hear the distant clanging of a blacksmith's hammer, the murmur of villagers, and perhaps the low, foreboding toll of a church bell. Now, imagine yourself standing there, the chill seeping into your very bones, not just from the weather, but from an accusation hanging over your head like a guillotine. You probably won't survive this, not in the way you know yourself to be. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? It's always fun to see how far these bedtime stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're about to discover the grim medieval consequences for women accused of straying. The very air you breathe in this imagined past is thick with judgment, especially for you as a woman. In the stark, patriarchal societies of the Middle Ages, the concept of female fidelity wasn't merely a moral guideline. It was a cornerstone of social order, deeply intertwined with property rights, inheritance, and the purity of family lines. A man's lineage was paramount, and the fear of an illegitimate child inheriting his wealth or title was a powerful driver behind the brutal enforcement of fidelity for women. Scholars still debate whether the severity of these laws stemmed more from religious dogma or from deeply ingrained economic anxieties about land and legacy. For you, standing accused, the why hardly matters. What truly matters is the looming. What next? Your alleged transgression isn't just a personal failing. It's seen as an attack on the very fabric of society, a challenge to male authority, and a potential poison in the well of inheritance. It's a fundamental historical truth that medieval women were largely subjugated under legal systems designed by and for men. Laws regarding marriage, property, and even personal conduct were overwhelmingly crafted to uphold male dominance and protect patrilineal interests. This wasn't some obscure legal nuance. It was the bedrock of medieval jurisprudence across most of Europe. And here's a curious little detail. In some regions, a husband could even sell his wife, though this was rare and usually considered scandalous. It really highlights the extreme view of women as chattel, doesn't it? Imagine being told, in essence, that your very existence, your body, your choices, were not your own, but rather an extension of your husband's domain. It's like finding out your favorite streaming service decided your account was actually part of your neighbor's subscription and they can cancel it any time. Slightly more dramatic, of course. The accusation itself is a storm cloud gathering overhead. It might begin with a whisper, a jealous neighbor, or perhaps the sudden, cold suspicion of your own husband. There's no innocent until proven guilty. For you, the burden of proof, if it even existed in a formal sense, often felt inverted. Your reputation, painstakingly built through years of quiet diligence and conformity, can shatter in an instant. This wasn't a time for nuanced arguments about consent or circumstance. The simple appearance of impropriety could be enough. You might find yourself caught in a complex web of social expectations, religious dictates, and local customs, all conspiring against your liberty. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from our last chat? Well, this situation feels a lot like being covered in it, but with far worse consequences. You're not just trying to avoid a sunburn. You're trying to avoid social death, or worse. The fear, cold and sharp, settles in your gut. This isn't just about what you did or didn't do. It's about what they believe you did. And in the middle, ages, belief, especially when fueled by male anxiety and societal norms, often trumped truth. Your journey into the terrifying labyrinth of medieval punishment for infidelity begins now. As you stand there, the weight of the accusation settling on your shoulders, you begin to grasp just how expansively medieval society defined and condemned female infidelity. It wasn't just about the physical act, oh no. The medieval mind saw a woman's virtue as a complex tapestry, and a single loose thread could unravel the whole thing. Any perceived lapse, any deviation from the strictest moral code, could be interpreted as a step towards outright adultery. Think of it less as a clear-cut legal definition and more as a sliding scale of suspicion, where even a flirtatious glance or a private conversation with a man who wasn't your husband could send you tumbling down. At its heart, the issue was the sanctity of marriage, which was viewed not just as a religious sacrament but as a foundational pillar of society. Within that pillar, a woman's role was unequivocally to be chaste, obedient, and, critically, to provide legitimate heirs. So, if you were seen laughing too heartily with a male acquaintance, or if you received a gift from someone other than your spouse, eyebrows would definitely raise. It's a curious point of historical debate whether the concept of intent played any significant role in these accusations, or if the mere appearance of impropriety was enough to seal your fate. It's like being judged not by what you actually did, but by what someone thought you might have done, or what a poorly interpreted gesture looked like. And here's a little historical footnote. Some medieval sumptuary laws even dictated what types of clothing certain women could wear, partly to prevent them from appearing too alluring or enticing, which could then, quite remarkably, be used as an argument against them in an infidelity case. Talk about blaming the victim before anything even happens. You'd quickly learn that the very idea of fidelity for women was deeply rooted in the concept of patrilineal descent. This is a fundamental historical truth. Medieval societies were obsessed with ensuring that property, titles, and lineage passed down through the male line, from father to son. An illegitimate child was seen as a direct threat to this system, potentially muddying inheritance lines and causing chaos in a world where land and power were everything. Your body, therefore, wasn't entirely your own. It was considered a vessel for producing legitimate heirs for your husband's family. It sounds absurd to our modern ears, like someone owning the rights to your entire genetic code just because you got married. But in that era, it was a terrifying reality. This stark reality explains why the punishment for women was almost universally harsher than for men. A man's dalliances, while perhaps frowned upon, didn't carry the same existential threat to the family structure. He couldn't introduce foreign blood into the legitimate line. For you, however, even the barest suspicion of doing so could trigger an avalanche of severe consequences. The definition of adultery, therefore, expanded beyond just the act itself, to include anything that might imply it or threaten the purity of the family. You might find yourself caught by local customs that were even stricter than formal laws. In some communities, merely speaking to a man alone could be enough to spark gossip that, once ignited, would burn away your reputation. It's a bit like being constantly under surveillance, but the surveillance is done by everyone in your village, and their interpretation is always the harshest possible. You can feel the eyes on you, judging every movement, every word. This pervasive societal gaze is a heavy burden, pressing down on you long before any formal accusation is even uttered. The rules of the game are rigged, and you're playing for keeps, with stakes you never agreed to. The whispers have solidified into an accusation, and now you face the chilling prospect of public humiliation. The shaved head. Imagine the scene unfolding. You're led through the narrow, muddy streets, perhaps by a village elder or a church official, your heart pounding a frantic rhythm against your ribs. The air, usually filled with the mundane sounds of daily life, now buzzes with the low hum of murmurs and pointed fingers. Every face in the crowd turns towards you, their expressions a mix of morbid curiosity, righteous indignation, and perhaps a flicker of pity from a sympathetic few. Then comes the shearing, in a public space, the village square, outside the church doors, a place where all can witness her. Sharp blade, or perhaps even rough shears, are brought to your head. Each strand of hair, once a symbol of your femininity, your beauty, your marital status, falls to the ground, severing not just physical ties, but metaphorical ones. This isn't just a haircut. It's a profound act of degradation, designed to strip you of your identity, to mark you as an outcast. It's like losing your entire digital footprint and being forced to start life with a completely blank, publicly viewable, and very shameful slate. This practice of shaving a woman's head as a mark of shame was a widespread historical practice across many parts of medieval Europe. It served multiple purposes. Firstly, it was a highly visible sign of disgrace, instantly identifying you to everyone as an alleged adulteress. There was no hiding it. Your shorn head screamed your perceived sin to the world. Secondly, it was a symbolic act of defense. Long hair was often associated with female beauty, modesty, and even a woman's crown within marriage. To remove it was to strip away these associations, reducing you in the eyes of society. Interestingly, scholars still debate whether this practice was primarily punitive or also had deeper roots in ancient purification rituals, where hair might be offered or removed to cleanse sin. It's all about context, isn't it? A curious detail emerges when you consider that even nuns, who had chosen a life of piety, would have their heads shaved. But for them, it symbolized devotion and humility, a stark contrast to the shaming. Associated with an adulteress. As the last tuft falls, a wave of cold air washes over your scalp, a physical manifestation of your newfound vulnerability. You feel naked, exposed, not just to the elements, but to the relentless gaze of the crowd. Their whispers might turn into jeers, their stares into glares. There's a strange, almost dizzying lightness where your hair used to be, a physical emptiness, mirroring the void in your soul. This is only the beginning. The shaved head isn't the end of your punishment. It's the very public announcement of it. It ensures that wherever you go, for weeks or months until your hair regrows, you carry the visible stigma. It's a walking, breathing billboard of your perceived transgression, ensuring that every glance, every whispered comment, every averted eye reminds you, and everyone else, of the societal judgment passed upon you. It's a scarlet letter without the letter, but with just as much, if not more, impact. The silence of the crowd can be just as deafening as their shouts, as they take in your humbled state, reinforcing your isolation. With your head shorn, a new layer of torment is added. The hair shirt. Imagine the coarse, scratchy fabric, perhaps woven from goat hair or rough wool, pressing against your bare skin, where your hair once offered a soft barrier. This isn't a garment chosen for comfort. It's designed for constant irritation. a relentless physical penance that keeps your alleged sin at the forefront of your mind, moment by moment. You're not just wearing a shirt, you're wearing a perpetual reminder of your shame, a garment that chafes and pricks with every movement. It's like having a permanent internal alarm going off, reminding you of every uncomfortable glance and every whispered judgment you've endured. This particular form of penance, the wearing of a hair shirt, was a common historical practice, though it wasn't exclusively for adulterers. Monks and devout individuals often wore them voluntarily as a form of asceticism and spiritual discipline, believing the discomfort would bring them closer to God or atone for their own perceived sins. For you, however, it's not a choice. It's a mandated punishment, transforming a spiritual practice into a tool of public shaming and private suffering. There's an ongoing scholarly discussion about whether the primary purpose of imposing such garments was purely punitive, or if there was a lingering hope that such physical discomfort would genuinely lead to spiritual reformation in the accused. And here's a rather unpleasant detail. Sometimes these delightful garments were also infested with fleas or lice, adding another layer of delightful medieval discomfort to your already miserable existence. So, not only are you scratching from the coarse fabric, but you're also dealing with uninvited guests. It's the medieval equivalent of having a perpetually itchy tag on a sweater you can never take off. But, way worse, as you trudge along, every step, every breath, brings a fresh rub of the rough material against your skin. It chafes at your neck, digs into your shoulders, and scratches your back. There's no escaping it, no moment of true relief. The discomfort is a dull, persistent ache that underscores your humiliation. This is the shame made tangible, a constant physical manifestation of your public disgrace. The hair shirt works in tandem with your shaved head. One makes your internal suffering a constant companion, while the other broadcasts your status to the external world. You are a walking, breathing sermon on the perils of straying from societal norms, a cautionary tale for all to see. The cold air might still bite at your scalp, a stark contrast to the burning irritation beneath the scratchy garment. You can almost feel the eyes of the villagers boring into you, seeing not a person, but a lesson. The shame isn't just about what you feel, it's about what they see. And what they see is a woman stripped of her dignity, confined within a garment that proclaims her perceived moral failing. This constant, itching torment serves as a continuous reinforcement of your punishment, designed to break your spirit and ensure you remember this moment forever. It's less about rehabilitation and more about relentless, inescapable public and private condemnation. And as the days turn into weeks, the hair shirt becomes less a novelty and more a part of your very skin, a second agonizing layer. There's no escaping the truth of your situation, no matter how much you might wish to simply disappear. The fabric clings to you like a shadow, dark and oppressive. Your shaved head and scratchy hair shirt are just the beginning of your public ordeal. Now, imagine yourself paraded through the very streets you once walked with dignity, burdened by a heavy object, all while facing the vile onslaught of a disgusted populace. This is the horrifying reality of rotten fruit and the stone of shame. You're not just being walked, you're being exhibited, a living example of moral failure for the entire community, the stone of shame. Or sometimes a similar, heavy, cumbersome object was a rather unusual, yet historically documented, form of medieval punishment. While not universally applied in some regions, it was a particularly cruel and effective method of public humiliation. This stone might be literally a large, heavy rock, perhaps even specially carved for the purpose, hung around your neck or otherwise affixed to you. Its sheer weight would make every step an agonizing effort, symbolizing the crushing burden of your alleged sin. Imagine trying to navigate uneven cobblestones with a literal millstone around your neck. It's designed to make you stumble, to make you look pathetic, to reinforce your powerlessness. Scholars continue to debate the precise origins of this specific practice, questioning whether it evolved from ancient pagan rituals of burden or was a purely Christian-era invention for public penance. As you trudge along, every strained breath and every faltering step is met not with sympathy, but with disdain. The crowd, a swirling mass of faces, begins to act. This isn't just about passive observation. It's about active participation in your degradation. Fingers point, voices jeer, and then the first soft thuds begin. Rotten fruit, spoiled vegetables, mud, and even excrement might fly through the air, splattering against your clothes, your face, your freshly shorn head. The stench is immediate and overwhelming, putrid mix of decay and human waste, clinging to you like a second skin. It's like being trapped in a particularly foul-smelling, slow-motion food fight, except you're the only target, and the stakes are your dignity. The act of pelting the accused with refuse was a common element of public shaming rituals across medieval Europe. It was a visceral, disgusting way for the community to physically express their condemnation and disgust. The act of throwing rotten food wasn't just about inflicting discomfort, it was symbolic. Spoiled food represented moral decay, and by pelting you with it, the community was metaphorically cleansing itself of your perceived impurity, while simultaneously marking you as unclean. You become a literal dumping ground for their collective outrage. You can feel the slimy splatters, the heavy thud of a harder vegetable, the humiliating trickle of liquid down your face. Your eyes sting, and a knot of nausea tightens in your stomach. There's nowhere to hide, no way to escape the barrage. The stone weighs you down, preventing any attempt to flee or even quicken your pace. Your bare scalp exposed to the elements, and the projectiles feels particularly vulnerable. Every impact, every splash, reinforces the public's judgment. It's a sensory overload of shame. The smell, the stickiness, the pain, the unending jeers. This isn't just a moment. It feels like an eternity. And through it all, you must keep moving, a forced procession of your downfall. The ultimate goal isn't just to punish you, but to ostracize you, to make you a pariah, ensuring that the mark of your alleged infidelity is not just visible, but physically felt and smelled by everyone around you. The physical and public torments may eventually cease, but for you, the accused woman, the punishment often shifted to a different, equally devastating arena. Financial ruin, specifically through dowry confiscation. Imagine this: the very wealth and property that were meant to secure your future, to provide for you within your marriage, are suddenly, ruthlessly stripped away. It's a profound betrayal, not just of your personal security, but of the social contract that was supposed to protect you. This act of dowry confiscation was a pervasive reality across much of medieval Europe. The dowry, which you would have brought into the marriage from your own family, wasn't merely a gift. It was a crucial component of your economic standing and often a source of power or leverage within the marital union. It could consist of land, money, goods, or even valuable movable property. In a society where women often had limited rights to own property independently, the dowry was frequently the most significant asset a married woman could claim. Losing it meant losing your economic foundation, your safety net, and a considerable part of your worth in the eyes of society. Scholars continue to debate the precise legal mechanisms for dowry confiscation in every region, as local customs varied significantly, but the outcome was almost universally dire for the woman involved. Here's a rather cynical, yet historically attested detail. In some instances, a husband might even accuse his wife of infidelity specifically to gain control of her dowry. Even if the accusation was flimsy, it was a rather convenient way to secure a financial windfall, wasn't it? Like divorcing someone just to keep their car. But instead of a car, it's your entire life savings and ancestral land. This added a sinister layer to any accusation, as your husband might have a clear financial incentive to see you condemned. You can almost feel the cold calculation behind such a move, a sickening realization that your very person has become a pawn in a larger game of wealth and power. As the legal proceedings, or perhaps simply your husband's decree, become final, the reality sets in. The lands your family brought into your marriage are no longer yours. The chests of coins, the fine linens, the jewelry all gone, now legally transferred to your husband's sole possession. This isn't merely an inconvenience, it's a catastrophic blow. Without your dowry, your status plummets. You become utterly dependent on your husband, or, if cast out, you become a pauper, reliant on charity or the extremely limited opportunities available to women without means. Your future, once perhaps secure and predictable, now stretches before you as a bleak, empty landscape. There's no recourse, no appeal for these lost assets. The dowry, once your shield, has become the prize for your alleged transgression. The financial punishment ensures that even if you survive the public humiliation, you are left with little to rebuild your life. It's a long-term sentence, a lingering shadow that follows you far beyond the initial shame. The loss of economic agency meant the loss of virtually all agency, leaving you vulnerable and powerless in a world that already offered you so little control. As if dowry confiscation weren't enough, you now face the demand for forced restitution to the husband. This isn't about reclaiming your own property. It's about paying him back, financially compensating him for the perceived damage and dishonor you've inflicted upon him. It's an extra turn of the screw, ensuring that your financial despair is absolute. You're not just losing what was yours. You're being compelled to give what little you might have left, or even incur debt, to your accuser. This practice, where a husband could demand financial compensation from an adulterous wife or her family, was a common legal stipulation in various forms across medieval Europe. It reflected the legal and societal view of marriage as a contract where the wife owed fidelity, and any breach was considered a direct financial injury to the husband. This compensation might be for the dishonor caused, the perceived threat to his lineage, or even, somewhat ironically, the theoretical cost of supporting a potentially illegitimate child, even if none existed. Scholars still debate the exact methods used to calculate these damages, questioning whether they were fixed sums or determined on a case-by-case basis, perhaps by local courts or simply by the husband's demand. It vividly highlights the deeply ingrained notion that a wife's actions had a quantifiable economic impact on her husband's standing. Here's a rather telling historical detail that really emphasizes the financial nature of these relationships. In some legal codes, a man who merely attempted to seduce a married woman could be fined. This shows that the potential for a wife's infidelity and the resulting financial risk to the husband was a concern even before any actual transgression occurred. It's a bit like having a penalty clause in a contract for even thinking about breaking the rules. Imagine if your current mobile phone plan had a penalty for just looking at a competitor's advertisement. So, even if your dowry has been seized, your husband or the local authorities on his behalf might still pursue you for further payments. Where would this money come from? Perhaps from any small personal savings you might have managed to accumulate. Unlikely as that might be, more likely it would fall upon your birth family. They might be coerced into paying to avoid further disgrace or to spare you from harsher physical punishments. This places an enormous burden on them, dragging your family into your personal nightmare, forcing them to bear the financial brunt of your alleged misdeed. You can feel the desperation mounting. Every avenue of escape is being systematically closed off. Your public reputation is in tatters. Your physical comfort is non-existent. And now, your economic future, and potentially that of your family, is being utterly demolished. The forced restitution isn't just about money. It's about power, about asserting the husband's absolute authority and the wife's utter subjugation. It's a final, crushing blow that ensures your life, as you knew it, is completely dismantled. There's no easy way out of this financial black hole, no convenient medieval credit card to swipe. You are truly at the mercy of the system, and that mercy is in very short supply. Beyond the public shaming and financial ruin, you now face the stark threat of physical punishment. The lash. This isn't a symbolic act. This is direct, bodily pain, inflicted to assert dominance and to make an example of you. The sting of the whip, the sharp crack of it cutting through the air before it meets your skin, is a terrifying sound you won't soon forget. The application of corporal punishment for various offences, including adultery, was a common disciplinary tool across medieval societies. While specific methods and severity varied widely by region and local custom, beatings or lashings were definitely part of the punitive toolkit. This wasn't some refined legal process. It was brutal and immediate, designed to inflict pain and public degradation. There's an ongoing scholarly discussion about the precise extent and frequency of such physical punishments, as records can be fragmented, but the threat was very real for those accused. You might be tied to a post, perhaps in the town square, or simply subjected to it within the confines of your husband's estate. Depending on local jurisdiction and his personal power, here's a grim little detail that highlights the errors. Attitude, in some places, particularly under Germanic law influences, the husband himself might have been legally permitted, or even expected, to administer the beating. Imagine that the very person you supposedly wronged, now holding the instrument of your agony. It's like getting a speeding ticket, and then the police officer is also allowed to come to your house and take a baseball bat to your car. It adds a horrifying layer of personal vengeance to the formal punishment. As the first lash cuts across your back, you gasp, the pain a sharp, burning line. Each subsequent blow builds on the last, a crescendo of agony. Your muscles tense. You might cry out, or perhaps, out of sheer defiance or shock, you remain silent, letting the pain wash over you. The physical impact isn't just about the immediate sting. It's about the welts that rise, the skin that breaks, the bruising that spreads across your back. This isn't a quick, clean pain. This is pain that will linger for days, making every movement, every breath, a reminder of your transgression. The sounds, too, are part of the torture, the sharp snap of the leather, the grunts of the person administering, the punishment, and the murmurs of any onlookers. You might try to brace yourself, but the unpredictability of where the next blow will land, or how hard makes it impossible to prepare. This is a visceral reminder of your complete lack of agency, your body subjected to the will of others. It underscores that your body, once a source of comfort or pleasure, is now a site of public correction and patriarchal control. This isn't just about exacting retribution. It's about breaking your spirit, about enforcing obedience through pain. And as the final lash falls, leaving you trembling and broken, you know this physical scar will be another mark to add to your shaved head, your tattered reputation, and your empty purse. It's a stark, painful lesson etched onto your very skin. As your body aches from the lash, the punishments shift again, this time reaching into the spiritual realm. You are now often required to perform religious penance, public repentance, sometimes for extended periods, as dictated by the church. This isn't just about physical suffering, it's about spiritual purification, forced and humiliating, designed to cleanse your soul through public displays of remorse. This demand for public penance was a fundamental aspect of medieval church discipline. Across Europe, the church, being a powerful moral and legal authority, viewed adultery not just as a civil offense, but as a grave sin against God. Therefore, beyond any secular punishments, a woman accused of infidelity would almost certainly face ecclesiastical sanctions. These could include excommunication, temporary or permanent exclusion from the church and its sacraments, forced pilgrimage, or, most commonly, public acts of contrition. Scholars continue to debate the true effectiveness of forced penance in fostering genuine repentance versus merely enforcing social conformity. It's an interesting thought. Can you truly make someone feel sorry just by making them perform acts of sorrow? Here's a rather theatrical, yet historically accurate, detail. You might be made to stand at the church door during services, often barefoot, perhaps wearing a simple, undyed shift, symbolizing your humility and defrocked status. This could be for hours, during multiple masses, over several weeks or even months. Imagine standing there, the cold stone floor beneath your feet. As the entire congregation files past you, their eyes either downcast in feigned piety or piercing you with judgment. It's like being forced to perform a play where you're the villain, and the audience is everyone you know, all silently booing your presence. Sometimes you might even have to make a formal public confession, reciting your alleged sins before the assembled community and the priest. Your words, meant to be an act of humility, feel hollow and forced. The purpose of this public display was multifaceted. For the church, it was about maintaining moral order and demonstrating the consequences of sin. For the community, it served as a visible deterrent and a way to reinforce shared values. For you, the accused, it was a profound psychological torture. Every whispered prayer of the congregation, every glance from a passing villager, serves as a fresh reminder of your disgrace. The spiritual weight presses down on you, augmenting the physical and financial burdens you already carry. You are meant to feel the full weight of God's disapproval, channeled through the eyes of his earthly flock, even if you didn't truly believe the accusation, or if you felt it was unjust, you would be compelled to act the part of the penitent sinner. There was no argument, no debate. You were expected to show humility, acceptance, and remorse. This constant performance of shame, day after day, week after week, could grind down even the strongest spirit. The public penance ensures that your alleged sin is not forgotten. It is regularly reenacted for the benefit of the community, a living monument to your downfall. And as you stand there, enduring the cold and the stares, you realize that even Your soul isn't safe from the judgment of medieval society. After the public shaming, the financial ruin, the physical pain, and the spiritual penance, a different kind of sentence might await you. Confinement to convents or seclusion from society. Imagine your world shrinking, once filled with the bustle of a household, the sounds of children, or the rhythm of village life, now reduced to the quiet, often cold, walls of a religious institution or a secluded dwelling. This isn't a choice for spiritual reflection. It's a forced isolation, designed to remove you from the temptations of the world and to prevent further perceived moral transgressions. This practice of confining women, particularly those accused of adultery, was a documented punitive measure. In various parts of medieval Europe, for some women, this might mean being sent to a convent, even if they had no religious calling. It was a convenient way for families or husbands to dispose of a problematic wife while maintaining a sense of propriety. The convent offered a structured, supervised environment where your actions could be controlled. In other cases, seclusion might involve being confined to a specific part of your husband's estate, or even a smaller, separate dwelling, effectively making you a prisoner in your own home or within your own village. Scholars still debate the specific legal and social mechanisms that dictated which form of confinement was used, and how often it was strictly enforced versus merely threatened. Here's a rather sobering, yet often overlooked, detail. Life in a medieval convent, even if forced upon you, wasn't necessarily a life of luxury. While some convents offered education and a certain degree of intellectual freedom for those who chose the life, for a forced inmate, it could be a bleak existence of strict discipline, menial labor, and a profound sense of loss. You might find yourself performing endless chores, participating in rigorous prayer schedules, and living under vows you never took. It's like being sent to a boarding school you never apply to, except the tuition is your freedom and graduation is never coming. The silence of your new surroundings would be deafening after the public outcry. You would be cut off from your children, your friends, and any semblance of your former life. The confinement isn't about rehabilitation in the modern sense, it's about control and elimination of perceived risk. You are removed from the societal stage, no longer a public spectacle but a private shame, hidden away from prying eyes. This isolation, day after day, year after year, could be a profound psychological torment. You would grapple with loneliness, regret, and the constant awareness of what you had lost, even if you were confined to a secluded part of your own home. The feeling of imprisonment would be inescapable. You might see your children from a distance, but interaction could be forbidden or severely limited. Your husband would exert complete control over your movements and communications. This type of seclusion ensured that the stain of infidelity remained private, protecting the family's honor from further public scrutiny. Ultimately, whether in a convent or a private dwelling, your world would shrink to the walls that contained you, a constant, physical reminder of your lost freedom, and the inescapable consequences of the accusation that shattered your life. Your existence becomes a quiet, mournful echo. The specter of punishment darkens further, reaching its most terrifying peak, the ultimate penalty, execution. While not as common as public humiliation or financial ruin, the possibility of facing death for your perceived transgressions was a chilling reality for some women accused of infidelity in the Middle Ages. The very thought sends a shiver down your spine, doesn't it? To lose everything, and then your life itself, for a crime that was often judged so unequally. The death penalty for adultery was a historically attested, albeit variable, punishment across different European regions and legal systems during the medieval period. It was more prevalent in areas strongly influenced by Germanic law, or where secular authorities took a particularly harsh stance on moral offenses. In other places, especially those under heavier Roman or Church law influence, execution for simple adultery became rarer over time, often replaced by less extreme forms of punishment. There's an active scholarly discussion about the exact prevalence of capital punishment for adultery, with historians sifting through fragmentary legal records to understand how often it was truly carried out versus merely threatened. Here's a disturbing detail that underscores the severity. In some societies, the method of execution itself was designed to reflect the nature of the crime. For instance, adulteresses might be drowned, reflecting the idea of cleansing impurity, or buried alive, symbolizing their return to the earth in disgrace. Imagine being led to a cold riverbank, the chill seeping into your bones, knowing what awaits, or being forced into a freshly dug pit, the dirt cold and damp as the sounds of the world begin to fade. It's not just a quick end. It's a terrifying, often symbolic, demise. The underlying rationale for such an extreme penalty often tied back to the fundamental threat to patriarchal order and property. As discussed before, the fear of illegitimate heirs contaminating the pure patrilineal line was immense. In some contexts, infidelity could even be equated with treason against the husband, a concept we'll explore more deeply soon, elevating it from a personal offense to a crime against the social fabric, punishable by death. For you, standing accused, the legal nuance hardly matters. What matters is the absolute finality of it all. Your entire existence, all your hopes, fears, and memories, could be extinguished because of an accusation, perhaps even a false one. The psychological toll of knowing this possibility hangs over you is immense. Every step you take, every conversation you overhear, is colored by this ultimate threat. You might try to suppress the fear, to convince yourself it won't come to that. But the image of the gallows, the river, or the grave is always lurking at the back of your mind. This form of punishment, even when rarely executed, served as a powerful deterrent, a stark warning to all women about the absolute consequences of perceived disloyalty. It solidified the message. In medieval society, your life, quite literally, could be forfeited for a breach of fidelity. As you contemplate the terrifying possibility of execution, you must understand a particularly grim concept that underpinned this ultimate punishment: the idea of treason against the husband. This wasn't merely a figure of speech. In some medieval legal traditions, your alleged infidelity could be formally equated with an act of treason, elevating a personal breach of trust into a crime against the established order, demanding the most severe retribution. This notion that a wife's adultery could be seen as a form of treason was a distinct and unsettling feature in certain medieval legal systems, particularly those influenced by Roman law. As a concept of laesa majestas, offense against majesty applied to the domestic sphere. The husband, as the head of the household, was considered a miniature sovereign within his own domain. Therefore, a betrayal of fidelity was not just a personal slight, but an attack on his authority, his honor, and the stability of his household, which was viewed as a microcosm of the kingdom itself. Scholars are still piecing together the exact historical lineage of this legal concept, trying to determine how widespread it truly was, and in which specific legal codes it held the most weight. Here's a rather chilling historical parallel. Just as a subject who betrayed their king faced the ultimate penalty, so too might a wife who betrayed her lord her husband. This fascinating, if horrifying, legal equivalency meant that the stakes were incredibly high. Imagine if breaking your marriage vows was considered as serious as selling state secrets. It makes that "till death do us part" line take on a whole new, much more literal meaning, doesn't it? The rationale behind this extreme interpretation was, again, deeply tied to the primacy of the patrilineal line and the integrity of inheritance. An illegitimate child, conceived through adultery, was seen as an impostor, a false heir who could usurp the rightful lineage and property. This was not just a matter of personal scandal, it was an economic and political threat to the family's power and continuity. By equating it with treason, the legal system provided the ultimate justification for removing the threat. The unfaithful wife in the most definitive way possible. So, for you, standing accused, the formal charge might not explicitly be treason, but the underlying legal philosophy would treat your actions with the same gravity. You would be seen as undermining the very structure of your husband's authority and, by extension, the social hierarchy. The weight of this accusation is immense, transforming your private life into a public threat. It means that the full machinery of state power, not just local custom or religious censure, could be brought to bear against you. This legal framing stripped away any last vestiges of personal agency, casting you as an enemy of the established order. The concept of treason against the husband provides a chilling insight into just how thoroughly a medieval woman's life and body were considered the property and responsibility of her male counterparts, with dire consequences for any perceived breach of that ownership. Having explored the chilling concept of treason against the husband, we now turn to an even more viscerally shocking punishment prescribed by some medieval traditions: nose or ear removal. Imagine the cold glint of the blade, the sudden, searing pain, and the horrifying, permanent disfigurement that would forever mark you. This isn't just about pain. It's about erasing your beauty, your identity, leaving you with a constant, visible reminder of your alleged shame. This gruesome practice of mutilation, specifically cutting off a woman's nose or ears as a punishment for adultery, was a distinct feature of certain Germanic legal traditions during the early and high Middle Ages. While not universally applied across all of Europe, it was undeniably part of the punitive landscape in regions where these legal codes held sway. The rationale behind such a brutal act was multifaceted. It served as an undeniable public marker of the crime. It was meant to deter others through extreme example, and it was a form of retributive justice designed to disfigure and diminish the accused. There's an ongoing scholarly debate regarding how widespread and frequently these mutilations were actually carried out, as surviving legal texts might prescribe them more often than archaeological evidence suggests they occurred. Here's a particularly unsettling detail. The nose, being central to the face, was a significant feature of beauty and identity. To remove it was to utterly ruin a woman's appearance, making her a permanent outcast. Similarly, ears, while less central, still marked a profound disfigurement. Imagine trying to live a normal life with such a visible, undeniable sign of your alleged transgression. It's like having a permanent, horrifying social media filter applied to your face that you can never turn off, broadcasting your supposed sin to everyone you meet. The physical pain of such an act would be immense, followed by the constant agony of healing, infection, and the lifelong burden of disfigurement. Beyond the immediate suffering, the psychological impact would be devastating. Every glance in a reflective surface, every reaction from a stranger, would reinforce your altered reality. You would be a living monument to medieval justice, a walking warning sign. This punishment was far more than just a physical penalty. It was a societal death sentence in many ways. A woman so marked would find it almost impossible to remarry, to secure employment, or to reintegrate into polite society. Her future would be irrevocably tainted. This extreme form of punishment highlights the medieval obsession with control over the female body and sexuality. It wasn't enough to shame you, to impoverish you, or even to confine you. In some places, they sought to literally carve the punishment onto your flesh, ensuring that your perceived transgression was etched into your very being. It's a chilling reminder of the lengths to which society would go to enforce its rigid moral codes and protect the patriarchal lineage. The horror of such an act would linger in the collective memory, serving as a powerful, unspoken threat to any woman who might consider straying from her prescribed path. From the chilling disfigurement, we now turn to an even more immediate and brutal consequence: a husband's right to kill if he caught them in the act. Imagine the raw, uncontrolled fury, the sudden, violent eruption of a husband's perceived justice in the very moment of betrayal. This wasn't some distant legal threat. This was an immediate, visceral danger that could end your life without trial or appeal. The legal or customary allowance for a husband to kill his wife and her lover if he caught them in flagrante delicto, in the act of committing adultery, was a notable, albeit controversial, aspect of some medieval legal traditions, particularly those with roots in ancient Roman law. While not uniformly applied across all of Europe, and sometimes debated even within the legal circles of the time, its existence speaks volumes about the absolute authority granted to husbands over their wives and households. Scholars continue to debate the frequency with which this right was actually exercised, and the extent to which it was truly condoned by broader societal norms, versus being a legal loophole for vengeful acts. Here's a gruesome detail that clarifies the grim reality in some interpretations. This right was less about murder and more about honor killing, where the immediate act of violence was seen as a justifiable response to an unbearable affront to the husband's honor and property rights. It wasn't always a planned, premeditated act, but rather a sudden, explosive reaction. Imagine the scene. The door bursts open, your heart leaps into your throat, and in a flash, your life, or your lover's, is brutally extinguished. There's no time for pleas, no chance for explanation. It's like a medieval action movie, but you're starring in the tragic, unscripted ending. The rationale behind such a draconian allowance was, yet again, deeply rooted in the protection of the patrilineal line and property. The act of adultery, caught red-handed, was the most undeniable threat to a husband's claim over his heirs and his estate. By granting him the right to summarily execute both parties, the law effectively gave him the power to immediately remove the threat and to publicly reclaim his honor. It was a stark declaration that a wife's body and fidelity were his exclusive domain, and any trespass could be met with lethal force. For you, this legal provision meant living with a constant, unspoken peril. Every clandestine meeting, every secret glance, carried not just the risk of exposure and shame, but the immediate threat of death. You were literally risking your life. This extreme right underscores the immense power imbalance within medieval marriages and the vulnerability of women. It served as a stark reminder that a husband's honor and lineage superseded a woman's right to life in the eyes of many legal systems. The shadow of this brutal possibility loomed large, a terrifying testament to the ultimate control a husband could wield over his wife's destiny. having witnessed the individual horrors that could befall an accused woman, it's crucial to understand the broader systemic unfairness, the disparities in punishment, women versus men's punishment. You see, the medieval world operated on a stark double standard, where men and women were judged by vastly different moral scales for the very same act of infidelity. The consequences for him, almost universally, were far less severe than for you. This blatant inequality was a pervasive and deeply embedded characteristic of medieval legal and social systems. While adultery was technically a sin for both sexes, and could even be legally prohibited for men in some areas, the actual enforcement and severity of punishment were overwhelmingly skewed against women. A man might face a fine public reprimand, or perhaps a period of penance. A woman, as you've seen, could face mutilation, forced seclusion, or even death. It's like a sports game where one team gets a slap on the wrist for a foul, while the other gets sent to the penalty box for life. This fundamental imbalance is a topic historians frequently explore, trying to untangle the complex interplay of religious doctrine, economic concerns, and societal power structures that created such a lopsided system. Here's a rather illuminating detail. For a man, adultery might be seen as a minor transgression, a lapse in judgment, or even a sign of virility in some twisted social circles. For a woman, it was a profound stain on her character, a threat to the very fabric of society, and an unforgivable sin. It's the kind of double standard that would make your modern heads spin a medieval boys will be boys attitude, but with infinitely graver consequences for the girls. The primary reason for this glaring disparity, which we touched upon earlier, circles back to the absolute obsession with the purity of the patrilineal line and the sanctity of inheritance. A man's infidelity, while perhaps morally dubious, did not directly threaten the legitimacy of his heirs. Any children he fathered outside of marriage would not typically be brought into his legitimate household and thus pose no direct threat to his property or lineage. Your infidelity, however, carried the terrifying risk of introducing an illegitimate child into the marital home. A child who could then mistakenly inherit land, titles, and wealth that rightfully belonged to the husband's bloodline. This fear of false heirs was paramount. It meant that your body, your fidelity, was seen as a gatekeeper to the family's future. If that gate was breached, the entire lineage was at risk. Hence, the disproportionately harsh punishments for women. It wasn't about moral superiority. It was about patriarchal control over reproduction and property. You were not just punished for a moral failing, but for a potential economic and dynastic catastrophe. This fundamental injustice underscores the profound gender inequality that defined medieval life, leaving women far more vulnerable to severe repercussions for actions that their male counterparts could often get away with, or at least escape with a mere slap on the wrist. Building on the stark realities of unequal punishment, let's delve deeper into the core reason behind such severity for women: the purity of the patrilineal line concerns. Imagine a society where your entire family's wealth, power, and social standing depend not just on who your father was, but on the absolute certainty that his sons are truly his sons, and their sons after them. This fear of a tainted lineage, of illegitimate blood mixing with pure, noble, or even common stock, was an almost palpable anxiety. This profound concern for the purity of the patrilineal line was a central organizing principle of medieval European society, especially among the nobility and landed gentry, but also extending to peasant families. Inheritance was typically through the male line, meaning property, titles, and even family names passed from father to legitimate son. Any doubt about a son's legitimacy could destabilize families, cause property disputes, and even lead to feuds and violence. Scholars extensively debate the extent to which this concern was purely pragmatic to ensure accurate inheritance versus being deeply intertwined with broader concepts of male honor and control over female sexuality. And here's a rather fascinating, if unsettling, detail. The concept of male honor was often inextricably linked to the chastity of the women in his family, his wife, daughters, and sisters. A wife's infidelity was seen as a direct affront to her husband's honor, essentially broadcasting to the world that he could not control his own household, or worse, that he might be raising another man's child as his own. It's like a medieval credit score, but instead of finances, it's all about the perceived purity of your wife's womb. A bad score could ruin your reputation entirely. For you, as a woman, this meant your body was, in many ways, considered a vessel for the continuation of your husband's lineage. Your fertility was not just a personal blessing, it was a societal responsibility to produce legitimate heirs. If you were accused of infidelity, the greatest threat wasn't just to your marriage, but to the entire dynastic future of your husband's family. This explains why the punishments were so extreme. They weren't just punishing a moral lapse. They were attempting to safeguard the very foundation of medieval power structures. It was a societal obsession that shaped laws, customs, and beliefs, dictating a woman's every move. The anxiety was palpable. Imagine a lord, his entire life built on his ancestral lands, suddenly doubting if his apparent heir was truly his. This doubt could unravel generations of careful planning, alliances, and accumulated wealth. It could plunge a family into legal battles or even open conflict. Therefore, any perceived threat to the purity of the lineage, especially from the woman responsible for producing heirs, was met with disproportionate severity. Your actions, or even just the whispers about them, had far-reaching implications, extending beyond your personal life to the very core of medieval social order. It truly makes you appreciate modern paternity tests, doesn't it? Though, perhaps, not the drama that comes with them. Following closely on the heels of the concern for lineage purity comes the terrifying practical consequence: illegitimate heirs and inheritance. This was the tangible fear, the nightmare scenario for any medieval patriarch. Imagine the very real possibility that the child you are raising, the son you believe will inherit your lands and title, might, in fact, carry another man's blood. This wasn't just a matter of family shame. It was an economic catastrophe, and a legal quagmire waiting to happen. This profound anxiety about illegitimate heirs was a defining characteristic of medieval inheritance, laws, and societal norms. In a feudal system where land was wealth and power, the clear, undeniable transfer of property from father to legitimate son was paramount. If a child's paternity was in doubt, especially in the absence of precise genetic testing, the entire chain of inheritance could be thrown into chaos. Scholars often discuss the various legal and social strategies employed to prevent or deal with such situations, from strict moral codes to elaborate legal mechanisms for disinheritance, but the fundamental fear remained. Here's a rather dark, yet historically evident, aspect of this concern. The legal systems were often designed to protect the male lineage at almost any cost, even at the expense of women's lives or well-being. A child born of adultery might legally be considered a bastard and thus have no claim to the father's inheritance. But the existence of such a child within the marital home was still a profound threat to the family's honor and public perception. It's like a medieval version of a corporate takeover, but instead of companies, it's bloodlines, and the stakes are infinitely higher. For you, as the woman, this put an immense pressure on your fidelity. Your perceived transgression could literally jeopardize your husband's entire legacy. If you bore an illegitimate child, even if not openly acknowledged as such, it created a situation where property might pass to someone not biologically related. To the husband's family, this could lead to intense legal disputes, family feuds, and a lasting stain on the family's honor. It's important to remember that in this era, without modern science, the only way to be certain of paternity was to ensure the absolute fidelity of the wife. The fear wasn't just hypothetical. There were documented cases of property disputes arising from questions of legitimacy. The extreme punishments meted out to women accused of infidelity were, in part, an attempt to serve as the ultimate deterrent against this particular form of fraud against the patrilineal line. You weren't just punished for a moral sin. You were punished for threatening the very economic and social stability of the powerful families that formed the backbone of medieval society. Your body, in essence, was a crucial piece of the inheritance puzzle, and any perceived deviation could lead to its violent rearrangement. The medieval mind was meticulous about lineage, even if it meant being merciless towards anyone who threatened its purity. Having explored the deep-seated fears surrounding lineage and inheritance, let's now confront a stark and infuriating truth of medieval society: men's greater sexual freedom, while you, as a woman, faced brutal punishments for even the suggestion of infidelity. Your male counterparts often enjoyed a vastly different, far more lenient set of rules regarding their sexual conduct. It is a well-established, historical fact that a significant double standard existed concerning sexual morality in the Middle Ages. While the Church condemned adultery for both sexes, societal practice and secular law often treated male infidelity with considerable leniency, if it was punished at all. A man's illicit relationships, particularly with unmarried women or prostitutes, were frequently overlooked or resulted in minor penalties, if any. Scholars frequently debate the extent to which this leniency for men undermined the Church's moral authority, or if it was simply a pragmatic concession to male power and societal norms. Here's a rather frustrating historical detail. A man's honor was rarely, if ever, diminished by his own sexual exploits outside of marriage. In some perverse ways, it might even be seen as a sign of virility or power, an odd sort of medieval flex. Think about it. A man could have mistresses, frequent brothels, and father illegitimate children without facing the public shaming, financial ruin, or physical mutilation that you, as a woman, would endure. It's like a medieval get-out-of-jail-free card, but only if you happen to be male. The underlying reason for this glaring disparity, of course, circled back to the fundamental concern for legitimate heirs and property. As we've discussed, a man's infidelity did not threaten his lineage or the inheritance of his legitimate children. His children by a mistress or another woman would generally have no claim to his main property or title. Therefore, his actions, while perhaps morally questionable to some, did not pose the same existential threat to the social and economic order. For you, however, your actions carried the direct risk of introducing foreign blood into the family line, disrupting inheritance and challenging male authority. This vast difference in treatment meant that medieval society effectively had two sets of rules: one incredibly strict and punitive for women, and another far more permissive for men. You, as a woman, were expected to be the gatekeeper of purity, the vessel for legitimate heirs, and the embodiment of your family's honor. Any deviation from this path was met with severe consequences. Men, on the other hand, had a remarkable degree of sexual liberty, largely unburdened by the terrifying threats that loomed over women. This profound inequality created a climate of constant fear and vulnerability for women, where their lives and bodies were subject to strict control and disproportionate punishment, while men operated with a freedom that seems almost unbelievable, given the severe restrictions placed on the opposite sex. It's a stark reminder of who held the power in that particular era. Having explored the infuriating double standard, let's now consider how these harsh realities manifested across the diverse map of medieval Europe, the regional variations in legal codes. You see, the Middle Ages weren't a monolithic block with one set of laws. Instead, a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and local jurisdictions meant that your fate, if accused of infidelity, could vary dramatically depending on where you stood. It is a key aspect of medieval legal history that laws were highly localized and often derived from a complex blend of Roman law, Germanic tribal customs, and evolving feudal practices overlaid with ecclesiastical church law. This meant that while the core principle of punishing female infidelity was widespread, the specific penalties from fines to mutilation to death could differ significantly from one territory to another. Scholars still extensively research and debate the precise influence of these different legal traditions on regional variations, trying to map out exactly where specific punishments were most prevalent. Here's a rather sobering detail. If you happen to live in a region strongly influenced by older Germanic tribal laws, your punishment might involve physical mutilation, like the nose or ear removal we discussed earlier. These traditions often emphasized visible shame and direct retribution. But if you were in an area where Roman law had a stronger lingering influence, the punishment might lean more towards forced seclusion, loss of dowry, or even death in more extreme cases, though the emphasis might be on property and lineage rather than purely on disfigurement. It's a bit like having different apps for your navigation, each with its own set of rules and consequences for a wrong turn. You just hope you're not using the one that leads to a cliff. The differences weren't just about the severity of punishment, but also about the legal process itself. In some regions, accusations might be handled by a local lord's court, where justice could be swift and arbitrary, heavily influenced by the lord's personal temperament or the accuser's standing. In others, the church courts might play a more dominant role, focusing on penance and spiritual atonement, though they too could impose severe secular penalties like imprisonment or public shaming. You might encounter differing standards of proof, or whether your testimony would even be admitted. This legal mosaic meant that medieval justice was anything but uniform. A woman escaping with a fine in one town might face execution for the same alleged transgression just a few dozen miles away. This lack of consistency created an unpredictable and terrifying landscape for women. Your very survival, your very fate, could hinge not just on your actions, but on the invisible lines drawn on a medieval map. It highlights the fragmentation of political authority during the era and how deeply local customs permeated every aspect of life, even matters of life and death. You're not just living under one king's law, you're living under dozens of subtle variations, each with its own unique brand of medieval justice. Building on the diverse legal landscape, it's crucial to understand the fascinating and often conflicting interplay between two major powers, shaping your fate: the influence of church versus secular law. You see, in the Middle Ages, there wasn't a clear separation of church and state as we understand it today. Instead, these two powerful entities often jostled for authority, creating a complex web of overlapping jurisdictions that could either intensify or, in rare cases, mitigate your punishment. It's a fundamental aspect of medieval governance that both ecclesiastical church courts and secular royal feudal or municipal courts held significant power over people's lives. Adultery, being both a sin and a social transgression, fell squarely into the purview of both. The Church, through its canon law, focused on the moral and spiritual implications, emphasizing penance, excommunication, and the sanctity of marriage as a sacrament. Secular law, on the other hand, focused on the civil consequences, such as property rights, inheritance, and public order. Scholars extensively analyze how these two legal systems cooperated, competed, or even clashed in specific cases, often depending on the strength of the local bishop versus the local lord. Here's a rather intriguing historical dynamic. Sometimes, a woman accused of adultery might actually prefer to be tried by a church court, as their punishments, while spiritually severe, might be less physically brutal than those handed down by secular authorities. While the church could order public penance, excommunication, or confinement to a convent, they generally shied away from the mutilations or summary executions favored by some secular rulers. It's like having to choose between a very long, uncomfortable lecture and a public wrestling match. You probably picked the lecture, right? However, this wasn't always a benevolent choice. Secular courts often viewed adultery primarily as a breach of a husband's property rights or honor, and thus their punishments could be swift and harsh, including fines, beatings, disfigurement, or even death. The Church, while condemning the sin, might also aim to preserve the marriage or ensure spiritual reform. This inherent tension meant that the outcome for you could depend heavily on which court had jurisdiction, or perhaps which authority the accuser chose to approach first. In some areas, for instance, a husband might bring a case to the secular court for dowry confiscation, while simultaneously seeking an annulment or spiritual penance through the church court. You would find yourself navigating this confusing legal landscape, often with little understanding of your rights, if any. The relative power of the local bishop versus the local lord could be a life or death matter for you. Sometimes, secular authorities would push for harsher penalties to assert their power and control over moral order, even when the church advocated for a more forgiving, penitential approach. Conversely, a weak secular authority might allow the church to impose more encompassing punishments. This intricate dance between cross and crown ultimately shaped the lives of those accused, underscoring the fragmented, yet deeply intertwined nature of power in medieval society. Your fate was not just in the hands of your accuser, but in the balance of power between God's law and man's law. Beyond the clash of legal systems, another crucial factor profoundly influenced your fate if accused of infidelity: social class and its impact on punishment. You see, medieval justice was rarely blind. Your standing in society, whether you were a noblewoman, a merchant's wife, or a peasant, could drastically alter the kind of accusation you faced, the process you endured, and ultimately the severity of your sentence. It is a well-documented sociological reality of the Middle Ages that class distinctions played a monumental role in almost every aspect of life, including legal outcomes. While the concept of female fidelity was universally valued across all strata, the application of justice for its breach was heavily stratified. A noble woman might face a very different set of consequences than a peasant woman, even for the same alleged offense. Historians frequently analyze how socioeconomic status could influence judicial processes, often leading to more discreet and financially focused penalties for the elite, versus more public and physically punitive measures for the lower classes. Here's a rather cynical, yet historically observed detail. If you were a high-ranking noblewoman, your family's honor and alliances were paramount. An accusation of infidelity against you could threaten not just your personal reputation, but intricate political marriages and powerful landholdings. Therefore, your punishment might be handled more discreetly, perhaps through forced seclusion in a distant castle or convent, a quiet annulment, or a hefty financial settlement designed to avoid public scandal that could destabilize powerful families. It's like a medieval celebrity scandal where the goal is damage control, not public stoning. Conversely, if you were a peasant woman, your life was far less valuable in the eyes of the elite, and your public shaming served a different purpose. There were no intricate political alliances to protect. Your punishment would likely be public and brutal: the shaved head, the hair shirt, the rotten fruit, perhaps even physical beatings. These acts served as a visible warning to the community, a harsh example designed to maintain social order among the common folk. You were expendable in a way that a noblewoman was not. Your shame was a spectacle, easily accessible and understood by all. The resources available to you also differed immensely. A noblewoman might have powerful family members who could intercede on her behalf, bribe officials, or find legal loopholes. You, as a peasant, would have none of these advantages. Your defense, if any, would be weak, and your voice barely heard. This deep-seated class bias meant that the concept of justice itself was fluid, bending to the will of the powerful and crushing the vulnerable. Your social standing determined not just your daily life, but your chances of survival and recovery from an accusation. It truly highlights how medieval society, despite its religious pronouncements, was deeply pragmatic about power and privilege. Beyond the stark realities of social class, your fate, if accused, hinged precariously on another unpredictable element: witness testimony and accusations. You see, in the medieval world, formal evidence, as we understand it, was often rudimentary or non-existent. Instead, your reputation, and indeed your very life, could be utterly destroyed by the spoken word, by the testimony of others, or by mere suspicion. It is a crucial aspect of medieval legal process that formal proofs were often scarce, and therefore eyewitness accounts, even hearsay, carried immense weight. Accusations could be initiated by a husband, a jealous neighbor, a disgruntled servant, or even a community member seeking to enforce moral norms. The concept of proof often relied on oaths, the number of witnesses, or even divine judgment, through ordeals, rather than forensic evidence. Scholars frequently examine the inherent biases and dangers within such systems, where personal animosities or communal prejudice could easily masquerade as justice. Here's a rather unnerving detail. Sometimes, the accusation didn't even require direct eyewitness testimony of the act itself. Circumstantial evidence could be enough. If you were seen speaking privately with a man, if you received letters, or if you were simply seen in a compromising situation, even if innocent, it could be twisted into proof of infidelity. Imagine the casual interactions of your day, suddenly being scrutinized and reinterpreted through a lens of suspicion. It's like every text message you send being publicly dissected for hidden meanings by a very judgmental committee. The power of a formal accusation was immense. Once uttered, it immediately cast a shadow over your life. You were considered guilty until, perhaps, you could prove your innocence, which was often an insurmountable task given the lack of proper legal defense mechanisms. There were no impartial investigators, no DNA evidence, no alibis easily verified. Your word, especially as a woman, often held little weight against the sworn testimony of men. Furthermore, the process of extracting truth could involve extreme pressure. While not necessarily judicial torture directly for infidelity accusations in all regions, the fear of it, or the psychological torment of relentless questioning, could lead to coerced confessions. The very act of standing accused meant you were already in a losing battle against a system designed to protect male honor and lineage. The fragility of justice in the medieval era meant that your life could hang by a thread, a single thread woven from a neighbor's gossip or a husband's suspicion. The truth, in such a climate, was a malleable thing, easily bent to the will of accusers and the prevailing social order. Building on the precarious nature of accusations and testimony, your vulnerability was further magnified by the potent force of whispers and innuendo, the role of rumor and gossip. You see, long before any formal court convened, long before any official accusation was made, your reputation could be utterly demolished by the relentless churn of idle chatter, speculation, and malicious whispers that swept through medieval communities. It is a well-attested social dynamic throughout history, and particularly potent in close-knit medieval villages, that rumor and gossip wielded immense power. Without widespread literacy or formal media, information spread organically, often unchecked and exaggerated. An initial observation, perhaps innocent, could quickly morph into damning evidence through retelling and embellishment. Scholars frequently analyze how informal social controls, like gossip, served as powerful mechanisms for enforcing community norms, especially concerning female behavior. Here's a rather chilling detail about this informal justice system. Sometimes, the rumor itself was enough to trigger a formal accusation, even if it lacked concrete proof. The mere perception of impropriety, fueled by a torrent of gossip, could be sufficient to ruin your life. Imagine that. Your entire future depending on whether old Agnes down the lane thought you lingered too long talking to the baker, and then she tells her friend Matilda, who tells her nephew, and suddenly you're the talk of the town, branded. It's like a medieval viral tweet, but instead of just cancelling your online presence, it could cancel your entire existence. The insidious nature of rumor was its self-perpetuating cycle. Once a whisper began, it gained momentum, drawing in more participants, each adding their own interpretation or witness account. People would assume where there's smoke, there's fire, regardless of the actual evidence. Your protests of innocence would fall on deaf ears, drowned out by the chorus of whispers. Your character was under constant scrutiny, and any deviation from the strictest norms of female conduct could be seized upon and distorted. This pervasive social pressure meant that even if you were completely innocent, the damage to your reputation could be irreversible. Your husband might feel compelled to act simply to protect his own honor from the public whispers, even if he privately doubted the accusations. The informal court of public opinion often rendered its verdict long before any judge or priest got involved. This highlights the vulnerability of medieval women, whose lives were constantly under surveillance, not just by authorities, but by every single member of their community. The weight of public opinion, a silent, invisible judge, was often as heavy, if not heavier, than any formal sentence, leaving you with little recourse and nowhere to hide from the pervasive shame. Amidst the overwhelming weight of accusations, the crushing power of rumor, and the stark biases of medieval law, you might desperately search for any glimmer of hope, appeals, and legal loopholes. But in this era, such avenues for recourse were often incredibly limited, complex, and largely inaccessible to someone in your vulnerable position. It is a somber historical reality that formal appeals processes, as we understand them, were rudimentary at best and often non-existent in many medieval legal systems. Justice was frequently dispensed locally by a lord, a municipal court, or a church official, and their verdicts were often considered final. The idea of a higher court systematically reviewing lower court decisions was still evolving and not widely available to common people, especially women. Scholars frequently investigate the rare instances where individuals, particularly women, managed to navigate these legal complexities, highlighting the exceptional circumstances that made such appeals possible. Here's a rather frustrating detail. Even if an appeal theoretically existed, you, as a woman, would face immense obstacles. You would likely lack the legal knowledge, the financial resources, and the social standing to effectively challenge a ruling. Imagine trying to file a complex legal brief, or even just understand the charges against you, when you might be illiterate, confined, and without access to legal counsel. It's like being forced to argue a case in a foreign language, in a court where no one cares what you say anyway. Legal loopholes, while they might exist in principle, were usually only exploited by the wealthy and powerful. A noblewoman with influential family connections might find a way to escape a harsh sentence through a strategic annulment, a quiet financial settlement, or by leveraging political alliances. For you, a woman of lesser standing, such loopholes were a fantasy. Your options would be severely constrained, often limited to pleading for mercy, or relying on the unlikely intervention of a benevolent authority figure. The system was designed to be swift and decisive, particularly when it came to maintaining social order and patriarchal control. Delays, appeals, and legal challenges were seen as undermining authority. Therefore, once an accusation gained traction and a punishment was decreed, it was exceedingly difficult to reverse the course of justice. The weight of societal expectation, combined with the lack of institutional support for the accused, meant that avenues for escape were narrow to the point of being non-existent for most women. Your fate, once decided, tended to be set in stone, a testament to the unforgiving nature of medieval law and society. The faint hope of a legal escape would likely prove to be just that, a faint, unreachable hope. Even if you managed to survive the public humiliation, the financial ruin, and the various forms of physical and spiritual penance, a profound aftermath awaited: marital dissolution and its aftermath. For a woman accused of infidelity, the very foundation of her life, her marriage, would almost certainly crumble, leading to devastating consequences regarding her future, her social standing, and critically, her children and property. It is a significant historical truth that medieval marriages, while often arranged for economic or social reasons, were also considered sacred bonds by the Church. However, an accusation of adultery often provided grounds for annulment or separation, effectively dissolving the union. This wasn't merely a separation. For the woman, it usually meant being cast out from her marital home, losing her social identity as a wife, and frequently her access to her children and any remaining property. Scholars often explore the varying legal and social implications of annulment versus formal divorce, which was far rarer and more complex in different medieval contexts, and how these impacted women's postmarital lives. Here's a rather cruel, yet legally common, detail. In the event of marital dissolution due to your alleged infidelity, custody of children almost universally reverted to the husband. They were considered part of his lineage, his property, and therefore you would likely be separated from your offspring, perhaps permanently. Imagine the gut-wrenching pain of being cut off from your own children, knowing they would be raised without you, taught to believe the worst about their mother. It's like having your entire family album deleted from your memory, with no way to ever recover those precious moments. Your social standing would plummet. You would no longer be a respectable wife or matron. Instead, you would be branded, often permanently, as an adulteress, a pariah in the community. This social ostracization would make it incredibly difficult to remarry, find work, or secure any form of independent livelihood. Your reputation, already shattered by gossip and public shaming, would prevent any chance of rebuilding a normal life. Furthermore, any remaining property that hadn't already been confiscated through your dowry or restitution would be lost. You would effectively be left with nothing, relying on the charity of your birth family if they were willing to take you back and endure the shame, or facing a life of poverty and destitution. Your future, once tied to the stability of marriage, would now be bleak and uncertain. The dissolution of your marriage wasn't just a legal formality. It was a profound personal catastrophe, severing all ties to your former life and casting you adrift in a society with little mercy for fallen women. The implications of this rupture would echo through every remaining day of your life, a constant reminder of what was lost. Beyond the legal pronouncements and societal condemnations, you carry an invisible burden, one that perhaps outweighs all others, the psychological toll of accusation and punishment. Imagine the constant gnawing anxiety, the pervasive shame, and the deep emotional scars left by public humiliation, fear, and ostracization. This wasn't merely a temporary discomfort. It was a profound, life-altering trauma. It is a human constant across all historical periods that intense public shame, fear for one's life, and social isolation leave deep psychological wounds, while medieval texts rarely delve into the personal, emotional states of the accused. The sheer severity and public nature of the punishments suggest an immense mental burden. Scholars often infer the psychological impact by examining diaries, letters where they exist, and the known effects of such stresses on human beings. Though direct medieval accounts of emotional suffering from this specific cause are rare, here's a particularly insidious detail about this mental torment. The shame wasn't something you could simply get over. It was continually reinforced by every averted gaze, every whispered comment, every memory of the rotten fruit hitting your face or the lash cutting your skin. You were constantly reminded of your perceived transgression, internalizing the public's condemnation. It's like living under a permanent cloud of judgment, where every interaction is tinged with self-consciousness and the expectation of disdain. The fear, too, wouldn't easily dissipate. Even if you survived the most extreme punishments, the memory of that possibility, the sheer arbitrary nature of medieval justice, would linger. You'd live with a heightened sense of vulnerability, constantly aware that your life could be appended again by a mere rumor or suspicion. The psychological impact of losing your children, your home, and your social standing would be devastating, leading to profound grief and a sense of utter displacement. This ongoing mental anguish would manifest in various ways. You might suffer from anxiety, depression, or a deep sense of despair. Trust would become a luxury you could no longer afford. The constant need to be vigilant, to guard against further accusations or social slights, would exhaust you. This inner suffering, though hidden from the public eye, would be a constant companion, far outlasting any physical scars. The memory of your humiliation would haunt your dreams, and your waking moments would be filled with regret, fear, and a pervasive sense of injustice. The psychological impact of being a medieval woman accused of infidelity was a life sentence of mental and emotional pain, a silent torment that defined your remaining days. As you bear the heavy psychological burden, it becomes painfully clear that another fundamental aspect of your suffering is your profound lack of women's limited agency and voice. In medieval society, your ability to defend yourself, to speak your truth, or to influence the outcome of your fate was severely curtailed, leaving you largely powerless against the machinery of accusation and punishment. It is a defining characteristic of medieval patriarchal societies that women possessed significantly limited legal, social, and political agency compared to men. Your voice, particularly in a formal legal setting or public forum, often held little weight. You might not be permitted to speak for yourself, or, if you were, your testimony could easily be dismissed as unreliable or emotionally driven. Scholars extensively studied the various ways medieval women attempted to exercise agency within these constraints. But the overarching reality was one of profound disempowerment. Here's a rather frustrating detail. Your legal representation, if any, would be minimal to non-existent. You wouldn't have access to trained lawyers as we understand them today. Any defense would likely be mounted by your husband if he chose to defend you, which was unlikely in an infidelity case where he was the accuser or male family members, whose primary concern might be protecting the family's honor rather than your individual well-being. Imagine being on trial, knowing your life hangs in the balance, but someone else is doing all the talking, and they might not even have your best interests at heart. It's like being silenced in your own story, while others narrate your downfall. Your social position further compounded this lack of voice. As a woman, you were largely expected to be submissive, quiet, and obedient. Challenging authority, especially male authority or the established social order, was seen as an unfeminine and dangerous act. Any strong protestations of innocence might be interpreted as defiance, making your situation worse rather than better. You were caught in a trap. Silence implied guilt, but speaking out could invite further condemnation. This limited agency meant you were largely at the mercy of others' interpretations, biases, and power. You couldn't easily present evidence, cross-examine witnesses, or appeal to a higher moral authority with any real hope of success. The prevailing narratives about female nature, often seen as inherently weaker, more emotional, and more prone to sin, further undermined any credibility you might try to assert. The medieval legal and social systems were simply not built to empower women, particularly those accused of transgressions that challenged male control. Your individual truth, your personal story, was largely irrelevant in the face of collective male authority and societal norms. Your voice, if it dared to rise, was swiftly and brutally silenced. Even as the echoes of your suffering fade, the story isn't quite over. The harsh medieval attitudes towards female infidelity cast a long shadow, leading to the enduring legacy of medieval attitudes. You see, the beliefs, laws, and customs that shaped your fate didn't simply vanish with the dawn of the Renaissance or the Enlightenment. Instead, they subtly, and sometimes overtly, persisted, influencing perceptions of women, marriage, and morality for centuries to come. It is a complex historical phenomenon that social attitudes and legal principles, once deeply embedded, often evolve slowly rather than disappearing entirely. The medieval emphasis on female chastity, the unequal treatment of men and women regarding sexual conduct, and the profound concern for legitimate lineage continued to resonate, shaping laws and societal expectations well into the early modern period and beyond. Scholars frequently trace these continuities, exploring how medieval patriarchal structures laid foundations for later gender inequalities, even as societies industrialized and modernized. Here's a rather insidious detail of this legacy: the concept of a woman's honor remaining inextricably linked to her sexual purity continued for centuries. A woman's reputation, and by extension her family's, could still be irrevocably ruined by accusations of impropriety, even without the medieval punishments of shorn heads or the stone of shame. Imagine the Victorian era, where a fallen woman might not face physical mutilation, but social ostracization could be just as devastating, leading to poverty, social isolation, and immense personal despair. Remember our talk about Victorian women dealing with menstruation with cloth sanitary towels. Even something as private as that was handled with extreme discretion, reflecting a broader societal discomfort with female bodily realities and an emphasis on outward purity. It's like a medieval virus that mutated, becoming less overtly deadly but just as debilitating in its social effects. The legal disparities also lingered. While the most brutal physical punishments faded, the notion that a woman's infidelity was a graver offense than a man's often remained in legal codes regarding divorce, child custody, and property rights. Even as societies became more enlightened, traces of this medieval bias could still be found. The concern for legitimate heirs, though perhaps less overtly stated, still influenced laws regarding inheritance and family lineage, putting pressure on women to maintain strict fidelity. This enduring legacy meant that even in seemingly more progressive eras, women often continued to walk a tighter moral tightrope than men. The ghost of medieval attitudes, with its emphasis on female control and male privilege in matters of sexuality, continued to haunt societal norms. It underscores how deeply ingrained patriarchal structures can become, persisting across centuries and subtly influencing perceptions, even when the overt brutal methods of enforcement have disappeared. The echoes of your medieval night of terror would be heard, faintly perhaps, but undeniably, through generations of women to come. As we reflect on the long shadow cast by medieval attitudes, a fascinating and often uncomfortable question arises: the echoes of history in the present. You might be surprised to find that while the shaved heads and stone of shame are thankfully relics of the past, some of the underlying prejudices, double standards, and societal anxieties about female sexuality and fidelity still resonate, subtly or overtly. In various parts of our modern world, it is a compelling sociological observation that historical precedents often shape contemporary social issues. While explicit medieval laws are gone, the cultural narratives and gendered expectations they reinforced can persist in implicit biases, differing social judgments, and even legal frameworks in certain regions. Scholars in gender studies and legal history frequently draw connections between historical, patriarchal norms and persistent inequalities faced by women today, particularly regarding sexual reputation and family honor. Here's a rather stark, present-day example. In some cultures today, particularly those with strong traditional or patriarchal leanings, women still face severe social ostracism, family dishonor, or even violence like honor killings in extreme cases for perceived sexual transgressions, while men involved in the same acts face little to no consequence. It's like the medieval double standard, but tragically still playing out in headlines and lives right now. It's not a direct continuation of medieval law, but the spirit of that unequal judgment remains. Consider also the differing ways society often treats male versus female politicians or public figures involved in sexual scandals. A man might face public outcry, but often recovers his career, sometimes even enhanced by a bad boy image. A woman, however, often faces a far harsher, more enduring judgment, with her morality being relentlessly scrutinized, often ending her public life. This subtle, yet powerful, disparity in social punishment is a lingering ghost of the medieval double standard. It's like the algorithms of shame are still running, just updated for social media. Even in more progressive societies, implicit biases can surface. Think about the language used to describe a woman who is sexually assertive versus a man, or the pressure on women to maintain a certain image of purity or modesty, especially in marriage, compared to their male partners. These aren't medieval laws, but they are cultural echoes, whispers from a past where female sexual control was paramount. The fear of illegitimate heirs might have transformed into anxieties about child support or single parenthood, but the underlying societal pressure on women to manage reproduction correctly persists. So, as you reflect on the grim tales of medieval women, consider how elements of that historical context continue to shape contemporary anxieties, moral judgments, and gendered expectations. The battle for true gender equality often involves recognizing and dismantling these deeply ingrained historical echoes. Your journey through the medieval past reveals that while the specific punishments have changed, the fight against unequal judgment for female sexuality is, in many ways, still ongoing. As we journey back from the chilling echoes of the past, from the cries of injustice and the weight of medieval judgment, we arrive at our final destination, closing the night's story. We leave behind the dark, cobblestone streets, the public squares of shame, and the rigid legal systems that held women captive to such brutal double standards. It is a universal human desire to understand our past, not just for the sake of knowledge, but to illuminate the path forward. By stepping into the shoes of a medieval woman accused of infidelity, by feeling the psychological weight of the shaved head, the scratch of the hair shirt, the financial ruin of dowry confiscation, or the terrifying threat of the stone of shame, we gain a profound appreciation for the immense challenges faced by women in that era. Scholars across disciplines consistently emphasize that examining historical gender dynamics helps us recognize the roots of contemporary social issues and inequalities. Here's a final, comforting detail that connects back to the core of why we tell these stories. For all the grimness, understanding history offers a peculiar kind of solace. It reminds us how far society has come in many respects, even as it highlights the battles still being fought. Knowing the past can make us more vigilant in the present, more empathetic, and more committed to ensuring that such injustices are never repeated. It's like turning off a horror movie, but realizing that understanding the monster helps you to recognize it's less terrifying. Modern-day cousins. As you drift off tonight, remember the resilience of those women, even in the face of such overwhelming adversity. Their stories, though often tragic, remind us of the enduring human spirit and the slow, arduous, but ultimately progressive march of societal change. We explored the deep societal anxieties about patrilineal purity, the glaring disparities in how men and women were judged, and the ways in which these historical patterns continue to resonate in our modern world. From the legal rights of male concubines in ancient Greece to the property ownership of Mongol women, and even the pragmatic approach to menstruation in Victorian times. History often presents a kaleidoscope of different realities and perceptions of gender roles across cultures and eras. The anxieties and fears surrounding Roman marriage, filled with both hope and uncertainty, further underscore the complexities of women's lives throughout history. So, let your mind ease now. The darkness of the medieval night fades, replaced by the gentle quiet of your own room. The whispers of old judgments are replaced by the soft hum of your fan, and the chill of the past gives way to the warmth of your covers. Rest easy, knowing that while history holds its darkness, it also holds the light of understanding and the quiet power of reflection. Your journey through the echoes of medieval justice concludes tonight. Sleep well, and perhaps dream of a world where justice truly wears no blindfold.